Welcome back to Retrospective, the place for all your obscure, forgotten, and defunct wrestling needs. The World Wrestling Federation. For over 50 years, the worldwide leader in sports entertainment. If you're of a certain age, that opening narration brings you back to a very specific time. The new generation. For a lot of us, we look back at this time with lots of nostalgia for some of our favorite wrestlers, matches, and moments. But it was also when the Federation was at its absolute worst, creatively and financially. Things were so bad that Vince had to seek the company's fortunes overseas. Some of those tours included locations that may seem a bit unusual, including a real push in the Middle East. This is the story of the WWF in Kuwait. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein and his Iraqi forces invaded the nation of Kuwait. Saddam, wanting to take over the Kuwaiti oil reserves, refused to give in to international pressure to leave the country. Ultimately, tensions escalated between Iraq and the US, leading to the Gulf War. Kuwait was devastated by the fighting, and it took them years to rebuild and secure the country as they felt was necessary. Without getting too deep into the politics of it all, in post-war years, the Kuwaiti government did receive a lot of international criticism for how they treated refugees and other non-Kuwaiti citizens. A 1995 report submitted to the UK House of Commons accused the Kuwaiti government of expelling over 100,000 stateless Badoon peoples to camps on the country's border with Iraq. The report stated that the camps were without basic shelter, sufficient access to water, food, and other necessities. And it's with that background that the WWF enters the picture. Shortly after WrestleMania 12, it was revealed that the WWF's A Squad would be doing 5 straight nights in Kuwait City, Kuwait. Who's considered the A Squad? It's Bret, Shawn, Austin, Taker, Bulldog, Owen, Triple H, Ahmed Johnson, Party Marty, and Leif Cassidy. The goddamn Bushwhackers. Honestly, I kid around here, but it's a really good roster. All the shows would take place at an outdoor 30,000 capacity soccer stadium. It may have been Al Hamadi Stadium or Muhammad Al Hamad Stadium. It might have even been a stadium that no longer exists. I can't really seem to nail it down. Anyways, if you're familiar with the WWF's business in this era, then you may be curious how they'd fill a stadium that large. Well, that would be easy. These shows were what's called sold shows. In case you're unfamiliar, a sold show is when a local promoter pays a flat rate for the company to come and put on a show. In fact, reportedly, the local promoter setting up the tour was a giant mark that just liked hanging around with big stars from TV. WWF didn't need to worry about selling tickets, because they got paid the same amount regardless of how many people show up, even if they do a bad job.
Even if I do a bad job, they got to give me that other $2 million.
Okay. Great.
A current example this may sound similar to is the WWE's deal with Saudi Arabia. So in May 1996, the crew jetted off to Kuwait. And to make the tour something special, WWF held the first ever Kuwaiti Cup tournament. The first 2 nights would see the first round matches for the tournament, with each consecutive night featuring the next rounds. The fans in Kuwait actually got some pretty interesting matchups throughout the tournament, like Undertaker versus Isaac Yankem, Bret versus Owen, and the final of Ahmed Johnson versus Triple H. Ahmed would get the win and the Giant Trophy. This tournament win was part of the giant push Ahmed was getting at the time, a way to catapult him to the next level. There were also some non-tournament matches, like Undertaker versus Triple H, and the Bushwhackers versus Bob Backlund and Isaac Yankem. It's like a fever dream. The fans in Kuwait were also treated to WWF World Title matches, with champion Shawn Michaels taking on a variety of challengers. Night 1 saw HBK take on the British Bulldog, who he had some great matches with throughout 1996. Night 2 pitted Shawn against Owen Hart. Night 3 he was challenged by former champion Yokozuna. Night 4 the Rockers would explode once again as Shawn took on Marty. And the 5th and final night saw probably the most infamous match, as HBK was challenged by Stone Cold Steve Austin, who wore Bret's wrist tape as a way to troll the champ after a long trip. Wrestling Bios has a great video on the whole match. Obviously, it goes without saying, but Shawn won each of these title matches. While they were in Kuwait, they did some video packages about Saddam Hussein's invasion, and the superstars even visited some areas of the country that hadn't yet recovered from the war. These packages were featured on the WWF World Tour 96 home video, and I believe they also might have aired on Raw and Superstars. Now, is this tour part of an effort to rehab the country's image on the world stage? Similar to what the Saudis are doing with WWE now? I don't know. I'm not a political scientist, but I do find it interesting. As mentioned previously, some selected vignettes and matches aired on WWF TV globally and was released on home video on the World Tour 96 tape, which is how I first saw these matches as a kid. It was one of my favorite tapes, actually. The tour was a success as the WWF had a full house every night of 20,000 people, they got their money, and there were no major injuries or incidents to speak of. And because it was the mid-90s, the grind continued. Just 5 days later, the crew were back on their regular house show loop. But this wouldn't be their last trip to the Hollywood of the Gulf. The WWF would return the following April, not long after WrestleMania 13. This 1997 tour again was a sold show, so the Fed was guaranteed to make money from it. And they again brought along some top-tier and less than top-tier talents. Returning were Austin, Brett, Undertaker, and Owen. And making their first trips were Billy and Bart Gunn, the Godwins, Mankind, Sid, and Vader. This is very funny, so Glenn Jacobs also returned, but as Diesel this time, not Isaac Yankem. There's some interesting matchups throughout the tournament, but not nearly as intriguing as 96. There's another Austin Brett match, there's Bulldog vs. Mankind that I'd really like to see, also Vader vs. Freddie Joe Floyd, but honestly I'd rather this have been Vader vs. Tracy Smothers in, say, Smoky Mountain or Japan, and then I'd really be into it. Of course, the tournament was used to elevate a new star, Tiger Ali Singh. This was actually the debut for the second generation star. The WWF were really high on Singh. When he came into the company in January 97, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. They had an introductory press conference and a contract signing at Toronto's Sky Dome, with Bret Hart and all sorts of WWF officials surrounding him. Winning the second ever Kuwaiti Cup was a surefire way to get him instant credibility with the audience. We know it wouldn't help him at all, but I'm sure that was the thought process. Unlike 1996, this tour did not draw large crowds. Specific numbers are hard to come by, but it certainly wasn't 20,000 plus every night. So what do you do when you want people to come to your show? Obviously, you get the word out. Best way to do that, no matter where you are in the world? Television. And yes, this is going exactly where you think it's going. On April 11th, the second to last day of the tour, Vader and WWF champion The Undertaker appeared on Good Morning Kuwait to promote the last couple of shows. And the first question asked by host Bassem Al Othman wasn't "How do you like Kuwait?" "How are you guys so big?" None of those usual pleasant softball questions a TV host may ask a wrestler. Nope, he went right for the big one. Is wrestling real? Undertaker struggles to actually answer the question in a way that maintains some kayfabe. He probably wished he could have just knocked Al Othman out.
Wrestling is one of the finest athletic endeavors that you will ever see. You get people who can actually sell tickets by just their character alone. There's several people who could care whether or not I can wrestle or not. But the message that I bring when I go to the ring, my creatures of the night, they don't care what it is. But let me assure you, it's the most physical thing that you would ever do in your life.
Al Othman tries to move on to his next question directed at Vader, but the Mastodon wanted to answer the same question. Bassem gave him the floor, and here's what happened.
So I find your remark and your question insulting.
It's not my question, it's somebody...
Does that fucking feel fake, huh? Does that feel fake?
Hey.
Does it?
Oh, no, just...
Why don't you come down tonight, and before I kick his ass, I'll kick your ass.
Okay.
All right?
Just calm down.
Hey, we're not here to be insulted. I'm not here to be insulted.
Okay. Right,
After the show returned from commercial, Bassem left the set and a new host finished the interview. Once the segment concluded, Undertaker was rushed away by Jerry Briscoe, and later that day, Vader was arrested both for assault and humiliating conduct because it is illegal in Kuwait to swear on television. So it was probably the F-bomb that really did him in. Vader was placed under house arrest at a hotel that still allowed him to work the rest of the dates. The rest of the WWF crew returned to the States on April 13th, while the Mastodon would be detained for over a week. WWF would use the incident as an angle on TV to make Vader seem more dangerous and unpredictable, proclaiming he had been held hostage. Titan Sports also put out press releases regarding the arrest and made Vince available for interviews about it. Their openness about the incident really made a lot of people suspicious that it was a work, meant to draw up mainstream attention for the WWF. And that was kind of true. According to the Wrestling Observer, Dave Hebner and an English-speaking producer for Good Morning Kuwait had told Vader and Taker that they would be asked that question, and to really ham it up for the show. To be rough, be your characters, have fun with it, whatever. So Leon White took that to mean be Vader. Like, really be Vader. So when the question was asked, he went full Big Van Vader on Al Othman. The two wrestlers had also been told not to lay a finger on the host. Vader clearly let the moment get the best of him. Vader's lawyer in the WWF assumed by telling the court that was part of a storyline that Vader would get off scot-free. Problem there is that no one told Al Othman that he would be a part of this angle, so the court denied dismissing the charges. Vince also allegedly offered Bassam a $35,000 settlement, but he seemed to have disappeared after the incident. He didn't actually disappear, WWF just couldn't find a way to get in touch with him. He was fired after the incident, so going through the TV station wasn't going to work. Ultimately, Vader was ordered to pay a small fine of $120 to get his passport back. On April 24th, he finally returned to the United States. But later he was convicted in absentia of assault. However, this wasn't entirely the end of the story. In June 1999, Al Othman filed a $1.5 million lawsuit against Vader and the WWF for continuing to show the footage at events. I can't find the results of the suit, thanks Internet Archive hackers, but I assume it was thrown out due to some Jerry McDevitt legal trickery. Unfortunately, there's no full matches from this tour that I can find online, only these clips from Raw. The WWF wouldn't go back to Kuwait in 1998. I think something big happened that made these sold shows less appealing. Oh yeah, there was a gigantic wrestling boom that was happening domestically. Although these Kuwaiti tours wouldn't become a yearly extravaganza that gave WrestleMania a run for its money, they do have some very intriguing matches and some great stories attached to them. And honestly, I always enjoy watching WWF shows that take place outside their usual North American setting, especially before everything became so micro-produced. Like today, if they did this tour, there's no way the turnbuckle pads or ring canvas wouldn't match what they have on Raw every week. If you're curious to check out any of these matches, I've linked a playlist in the description of this video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, as well as any other obscure wrestling stuff you'd like to see covered here. I'm Scott from Retrospective. Watch wrestling, love wrestling, thanks for watching.